Alright, this is part 3B of my series on Christian unity. In this part, we will be discussing more about Catholicism, whether they are Christians. And today we're gonna be talking about icons. Now, to be honest, I've never really understood why Protestants have such a dislike of icons. I mean, there's nothing intentionally bad about them from what I can tell. They say that they're a form of idol worship, but I just don't really see that connection, to be honest. But in order to examine this, let's look at what an early church father said about the use of icons. We're going to be talking in this video about what Augustine of Hippo said about the use of icons and whether or not they are forms of worship. He says, "As to our honor of praying to the memory of martyrs and to the accusation of Faustus, that we worship them instead of idols. For in saying that we have turned idols into martyrs, he speaks of our worshipping them with similar rites, and appeasing the shades of the departed with wine and food. It is true that Christians pay honor to the memory of the martyrs, both to incite us to imitate them and to obtain a share in their merits, and the assistance of their prayers. But we build altars not to any martyr, but to the God of the martyrs, although it is to the memory of the martyrs. We regard the martyrs with the same affectionate intimacy that we feel towards holy men of God in this life, when we know that their hearts are prepared to endure with the same suffering for the truth of the Gospels. There is more devotion in our feeling towards the martyrs because we know that their conflict is over, and so we can speak with greater confidence in praise of those already victors in heaven than those still combating here. What is properly divine worship, which the Greek called latria, and for which there is no word in Latin, both doctrine and in practice, we give only to God." So this claim was circulating around Augustine's time, that the idols were in fact forms of worship. Augustine says, no, they're not. When we build altars or statues to martyrs or saints, we are in fact building them to God. They represent God, even though they are of the martyrs. Now, I could go into more detail on this, but this is not meant to be an argument for icons. This is merely meant to be an explanation that you can still believe in icons and still be a Christian, or and its relation to Christian unity. Of course, more than just Catholics use icons, of course. Anglicans use icons, and along with several other churches. But it is interesting that with all these doctrines that a lot of churches share, that Catholics seem to get most of what Protestants mostly blame them for having these practices, even though it's shared by a lot of churches, including even some Protestant churches. I specifically pointed out Augustine here because in its relation to my last video, because of course Martin Luther argued for the use of for the fact that the body and bread literally turn into the blood of body and blood of Jesus. So bread and wine literally turn into the body and blood of Jesus. So I use Martin Luther as an example of a Protestant who most Protestants, I believe, would consider Christian, that he holds these beliefs. And of course, Protestants, of course, would also regard Augustine along the same kind of lines. For example, Martin Luther said, "Holy Christendom has, in my judgment, no better teacher after the apostles than Saint Augustine." So clearly, even among the Protestants, Augustine holds a very high status. And so we have to ask ourselves, if Augustine can hold this belief and still be counted among a Christian, why is it that we'd hold a lesser standard to the Catholics? Of course, Protestants could go even one step further. I mean, because there are religions out there that don't just say that images, that don't just say that icons are forbidden, but that any images or pictures are forbidden.
I heard Allah's messenger saying, angels do not enter a house wherein there was a dog or some images or pictures of living creatures, a human being or an animal.
So it isn't just pictures of a dog. Allah doesn't allow pictures of any living thing.
Of course, we may regard such claims as ridiculous when we hear, for example, Muslims saying that all pictures are considered idolatry. Of course, it goes a lot further than just images, but they do definitely consider images to be forbidden, pictures to be a form of idolatry.
This is a picture of my adopted son, Marco.
And of course, when we are talking to different Christian groups about, what is or is not a Christian with regards to belief in God, we have to examine what is true monotheism or what is true polytheism versus true monotheism. You see, when a Muslim says that Christians or other groups are polytheists because they have pictures or because they believe in the Trinity, we don't want to have such standards. We need to be able to identify what a true Christian is with regards to monotheism, so that we can tell if when someone looks at an image, whether that image represents a god to them, or whether that image is just a form of paying honor to a certain individual. And so we need to not lose sight of what the image actually means to the person using the image, and not just assume that it's a form of polytheism. Another thing that we need to remember is that there is no prohibition in the Bible against images of any kind. Here we can see that the Israelites would look upon a bronze snake in order to be healed from snake bites. And this is just showing that if you saw people looking at a bronze snake in order to be healed from a sickness, that might look to an outsider as a form of idolatry. But knowing what the snake represents and knowing what the snake symbolizes is very important to understanding whether something is or is not polytheism, and we can't lose sight of that.